The memory of the bar still felt too recent, the stale air thick with beer and bad decisions. 5 friends, Phil, Dom, Hutch, Luke, and Rob, had been gathered, tossing around ideas for a holiday. Rob, always the most adventurous, had suggested a deep hike in Sweden, an idea immediately and collectively rebuffed by the others. It was meant to be a simple discussion, an easy night out. Instead, it became the prelude to disaster. Later that same night, Luke and Rob had left the pub to secure more alcohol. It was during this mundane errand that they stumbled into a robbery. The violence escalated quickly. While Luke instinctively found a place to hide, frozen by terror, the robbers focused their vicious attention on Rob, harassing him until the altercation culminated in Rob's death. The shock, the guilt, and the grief hung like heavy, unavoidable smoke over the surviving quartet. 6 months passed, defined by the gaping absence left by the brutal murder. In a desperate attempt to honor Rob's memory and perhaps purge some of their lingering guilt, the 4 remaining friends, Phil, Dom, Hutch, and Luke, embarked on a strenuous hiking trip. Their destination was Kungsleden, a legendary trail winding through the severe, beautiful wilderness of northern Sweden. The initial stages of the hike were grueling, yet predictable, but the predictability shattered when Dom sustained an injury to his knee, a painful impediment that stalled their progress. Hutch, ever the pragmatic one seeking efficiency, suggested a drastic course correction, abandoning the marked trail and cutting directly through the dense, uncharted forest. Luke immediately voiced his opposition, his anxiety rising. He distrusted shortcuts and the unknown. However, Dom, perhaps weary of the pain or keen to maintain the schedule, insisted. If a shortcut existed, Dom argued, they should absolutely utilize it. Despite Luke's protests, the consensus shifted, and they left the security of the marked path, plunging into the shadows of the woods. The forest immediately felt hostile. The air grew heavier, the silence more profound. Soon after entering, they came across a deeply disturbing sight. A massive moose, its internal organs completely gutted, hung high from the surrounding trees. Following this macabre discovery, they started noticing strange, unsettling symbols carved into the bark of the ancient trees, marking their reluctant passage deeper into the unknown. The atmosphere thickened with dread, only to be compounded by the weather. A torrential rainstorm erupted, a violent downpour that quickly soaked their gear and threatened to plunge them into hypothermia. Desperate for shelter, they stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. Inside the damp structure, the unsettling discoveries continued. They found necklaces scattered throughout the space, each bearing the mysterious symbols they had seen etched into the forest trees. More horrifyingly, they found a grotesque effigy. It was crafted from twigs and represented a decapitated human torso, disturbingly adorned with antlers serving as hands. Night descended, and the storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil within Luke's mind. He drifted into a fitful, shallow sleep, only to be pulled under by a terrifying nightmare. In the darkness of his mind, he relived the horror of the robbery, the sudden violence, and the moment he had watched Rob die. The collective trauma peaked with the rising sun. Morning revealed a scene of catastrophic mental and physical breakdown. Luke awoke to searing pain. His chest was bleeding, marred by fresh, inexplicable puncture wounds. Hutch, lying nearby, was screaming uncontrollably in sheer terror and had wet himself. Dom, mentally checked out, was catatonic, his screams centered solely on his wife, Gail. Most disturbing was Phil, found completely naked, positioned before the twig effigy, praying fervently to the makeshift idol. The group, shell-shocked and deeply disturbed by the night's events, realized they could not stay. They attempted to flee the woods, identifying a side trail that, unnervingly, was not present on any of their maps. Luke immediately voiced his protest, recognizing the danger of following an unlisted path, but the others were desperate to escape the cabin's taint. As they stopped momentarily to debate their location and direction, the tension between Dom and Luke, already frayed by stress, snapped. Luke spotted a colossal, imposing figure moving among the distant trees. He urgently pointed it out, but Dom dismissed the sighting, doubting its existence. The ensuing argument was brutal and cathartic. Luke attacked Dom verbally, claiming that if Dom had not insisted on the shortcut, they would never have entered this horrific part of the forest. Dom retaliated with the ultimate wound, labeling Luke a coward for failing to intervene, for allowing Rob to die during the robbery. The accusation hung between them, cold and sharp as a newly forged blade. They pressed on, the psychological trauma pushing them forward. As they walked, they stumbled upon further evidence that this path was fatal. They found an abandoned tent, thoroughly overgrown with foliage, suggesting it had been there for a significant period. Inside the remnants, they recovered a backpack and a wallet containing a credit card. The expiration date on the card was 1984. For everyone except Hutch, this was a profoundly bad omen, a clear sign that whatever tragedy had befallen the previous owner was ancient and irreversible. Hutch, desperately clutching to hope, insisted that the discovery meant they must be close to a lodge, proving they were following a path that others occasionally used. That night, the camp was shattered by Phil's agonized screams. The 3 remaining friends rushed to investigate, finding Hutch missing. His tent had partially collapsed, suggesting a sudden, violent struggle. Luke, Dom, and Phil frantically searched the dark woods for him, but their efforts were fruitless. By the time a cold dawn finally broke through the canopy, they were completely lost. The realization of their predicament was soon overshadowed by a far more gruesome discovery. They found Hutch. His body had been completely gutted and gruesomely impaled on sharp tree branches. Shocked and repulsed, the remaining 3 men gave Hutch a hasty, impromptu burial beneath the cold earth. The terror did not subside. As sunset approached, bathing the forest in unsettling orange and purple hues, Phil was suddenly and violently attacked. Before Luke and Dom could react, Phil was dragged away into the encompassing gloom by an unseen, powerful creature. His struggle was brief, and he was killed within moments. Now only 2 remained. Luke and Dom fled the site of the murders, driven by sheer terror. They ran until they broke through a line of trees and spotted a remarkable sight, a path marked by torches leading toward a small settlement. In a blind panic, they rushed toward the light, bursting into the first cottage they found. Their escape was immediately cut short. They were violently knocked unconscious. When consciousness returned, Luke and Dom found themselves in a cold, dim basement. They were tightly restrained. An elderly woman entered the space and approached Luke. She inspected the puncture wounds that marred his chest, the unexplained injuries from the morning in the cabin. As she examined the wounds, she revealed a chilling truth. She bore an identical marking on her own body. Shortly after, 2 men from the settlement descended into the basement and forcibly dragged Dom upstairs. When they returned him later, Dom was bruised and badly beaten. He spoke to Luke with a renewed, desperate urgency, confirming their worst fears. He knew his fate. He was to be sacrificed to the creature that stalked the woods. He pleaded with Luke, urging him to focus solely on his own escape. While Dom was hauled outside by the townsfolk and tied up in preparation for the ritual, Luke focused intently on his bindings, slowly and painstakingly freeing himself from the restraints. The ritual began outside under the vast, ancient trees. Dom, battered and resigned, began to hallucinate. He saw a figure emerging from the darkness of the forest, which he initially believed was his wife, Gail. However, as the figure drew closer, the horrifying truth settled in. It was not Gail. It was the creature itself, the thing they now knew to be the ultimate predator of the forest. The creature, immense and terrifying, picked Dom up with effortless strength and impaled his body upon a nearby tree. Luke, having partially freed himself, was soon confronted by a young woman of the settlement. She offered him the brutal truth, explaining the nature of the entity they had encountered and the function of the settlement. The creature, she explained, was not merely a monster, but a colossal, moose-like Jotun named Moda. Moda was described as an ancient, godlike entity whose lineage traced back to Loki. In exchange for continuous sacrifices provided by the cult that resided in the settlement, Moda granted its worshippers the ultimate boon: immortality. Luke was presented with a stark choice. He could submit to the cult, choosing to worship Moda and live, or he would be swiftly sacrificed like his friends. After delivering the chilling ultimatum, the young woman left Luke alone in the basement. Luke wasted no time. He fully freed himself from the restraints and ascended the stairs into the main floor of the cottage. He found a terrifying congregation. The room was filled with mummified worshippers, figures preserved in time, silent sentinels of the ancient ritual. As Luke watched, these desiccated bodies began to move. Armed only with a torch, Luke initiated a desperate, violent defense. He set the mummified congregation alight, ensuring the flames spread quickly throughout the cabin. The massive blaze acted as a beacon, successfully attracting the enraged Moda. Luke fled back downstairs. In the chaos, he located a hunting rifle. He immediately used it, killing one of the cult members who stood in his path. before grabbing a heavy axe. Outside, the Jotun, Moda, arrived at the burning structure in a towering rage. Its first victim was the young woman who had explained the ritual to Luke. Moda mercilessly killed her. Luke fired several shots at the ancient creature before making his final desperate escape from the compound. The chase was relentless. Moda pursued Luke through the deep shadows of the forest, not only threatening his body, but assaulting his mind. As Luke ran, Moda crippled his senses with paralyzing, visceral hallucinations of Rob's death, forcing Luke to relive the moment of his cowardice and failure. Despite the mental assault, Luke pushed on until Moda finally caught him. The giant creature forced Luke down onto his knees, towering over him, demanding submission. Luke refused. He was beaten, exhausted, and tormented, but he found a final reserve of defiance. He raised the axe he had salvaged and struck Moda. The blow was enough to stun the Jotun momentarily, allowing Luke the precious seconds he needed to break free and flee once more. He ran blindly uphill, driven toward a faint source of light. Ahead, he could see definitive rays of sunlight breaking through the dark canopy, promising an end to the nightmare. He burst out of the trees and emerged, stumbling, into an open field. Moda, the massive, moose-like Jotun, followed to the edge of the tree line. But Moda was bound. It was unable to leave the dense confines of the forest. The ancient entity roared its towering frustration and rage at the escaped sacrifice. Luke, finally safe from the physical reach of the godlike entity, did not simply walk away. He turned back toward the terrible sound, gathering all the fury and relief he possessed, and screamed back defiantly at the great creature. Knowing he was beyond Moda's harm, Luke turned his back on the horrific dark woods and began walking away. Moda, accepting its limitation, retreated back into the shadows and the encompassing darkness of the forest. Luke continued on, eventually finding a road, leaving the nightmare behind.